Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another thrilling episode of Under the Hood with yours truly. And I am so incredibly excited to host my colleague and friend, and collaborator, whatever else you want to call us, partner in crime, JJ Penna. Thank you so much for being here and taking some time to talk today.
This is such a thrill and a privilege. When I saw myself on the list of other coaches, I was just like, this is the best.
You're too kind. You're being very, very kind. Well,
I have to say, like, we encountered each other at a really good time in both of our lives where we were like just out of school and
yeah,
get kind of making our way as young artists. And
yeah.
we had such a good time.
Well, it was a different time, I think, obviously, than what it is now. But oh, hey, before we get into it too much, I want to say, if you happen to open your browser and go to Facebook and you see, if you go to my page on Facebook, if you wanted to share this video to your page so we can get more people or your fan base to watch, I would
Oh,
appreciate that.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
sure.
while you're doing that, I'll just sort of talk about how we met. I remember at the time you were at Westminster Choir College and I had recently moved down from New York City to the Princeton area. We were living in Plainsboro initially, and then we got a place over in Lawrenceville. But I'm trying to remember who was it that initially was like, "Oh, you," and obviously you'll want to mute the audio or
Yeah,
the.
sorry.
Sorry, no, no, I'm just hey, while we're figuring things out, it's always helpful to. One time I was doing the interview with Dimitri Pitas, and I was doing a month where I was talking to operatic couples. So I was talking to Dimitri and Leia, and he was like, "You didn't tell me to mute the thing. It was talking the whole time." I was like, "Well, you, I, okay, I'll mention it if I hear it, you know." But anyway, I can't remember who it was that initially said, "Oh, well, if you're down there in Princeton, you should look up JJ Penna." But whoever that was, I really am appreciative because when we started working together, it was such a fantastic supplement, addition, change, kind of great input to my artistic life. I had just finished at Juilliard, I think, or was maybe in my second year or something like that. And I just joined the Marilyn Horn Foundation roster and that residency that you and I did in Buffalo, I think was the first one I ever did. And I'll never forget standing in your studio and I was like, well, I mean, what do you want to do? What should we do on this program? And you were like, let's do one of the big ones, let's do a big cycle. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, I haven't really done that before. And you were so confident with it. I felt like, yeah, okay, we should. That's exactly what we should do. And you were like, how about Dictionary? And I was like, yeah, of course. I know Ich rolle nicht. That's from that, right? And so I had to learn so much. In fact, I think I was going through. Yeah, let me find it here. My little what is the line from Die Todesstadt, the Aus Gewesen, and then when Paul talks about his temple of memories. I have this little it's just like a little box of,
Uh-huh.
of CDs that, like, for whatever reason my mom has kept, and then she'll from time to time be like, do you want this CD of you and da da da. Well, here is
Oh my God.
the Buffalo. So I mean, listen to this program. If you had forgot, we started with a set of Handel stuff: Ombra mai fu, How Willing My Paternal Love, See the Raging Flames Arise. Then we did the entire Dichterliebe. Then we did the Samuel Barber, Opus 10, Rain Has Fallen, Sleep Now, I Hear an Army. Then we did the Ravel, Don Quixote songs. Then we did a whole musical theater set with like Some Enchanted Evening, Old Man River, I Got Plenty of Night, Soliloquy. And then whose idea? Oh, we should encore it with Largo a Factotum. I was, I was like,
That's the real
oh,
deal.
the
That's the real
power,
deal.
the power of youth. I was like, wow, it's like that's two recitals in one, right? That was amazing. I have such great memories from the time that we spent there together. And
This is also
anyway,
so random, but I've done so many super awkward outreach concerts, and you are definitely at the top of the list of like the easiest, best outreach person ever. Like those high
that's
schools and elementary schools, you were like on fire.
that's
Those
right.
kids
Part of
loved
that
you.
residency, we had to go like the 2 days before. We did like two a day, where somebody picked us up and where we drove over there, and you have to talk to the kids about what is art song? And
Right.
then we sang a couple pieces for him or whatever, and then we answered questions. And yeah, I mean, well, I don't know. Well, I appreciate you saying that, but I don't know. I guess I've always sort of been, it probably has to do a lot with the fact that being born with one hand, I've had to answer questions a lot from a variety of different people,
Uh,
how'd you lose your hand? Oh, wow. What's wrong with his arm? And then like the kids, and so there's always been a bit of, hi, I'm Weston.
yeah.
I was born without or well, I was on a camping trip and the bobcat appeared, above the campfire. I'll tell them some kind of crazy story before I tell them the truth. And I guess that somehow maybe bled over
Yeah.
into outreach ability.
Yeah. You were so utterly at ease with the crowd and with the situation. I remember.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it certainly helps to, I don't know, be confident in what you're offering. And I think that, one of the great things about having had you there so close to me where I lived, in other words, it wasn't like, oh, I'll fly into New York and we'll do like a marathon 2 or 3 day prep
Sure.
and then we'll go. We were able to work with together, alongside like for months, leading up to that.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
I don't know. I was just it was a lot of fun. I was excited about doing it, and I think that it's one of those things where like when you talk to kids, not as kids, but like if you respect them and tell them like, yeah, so this is how this is, and then they kind of respond in a better way, right? I think that
Right.
they get it. But anyway, what have you been up to? I mean, what was that? 2006? It's only been 15 years.
Well, I joined the faculty of NEC in the fall of 2019,
Congratulations.
and I continue on at the. I've been at Juilliard for something like 17 years, 18 years. Yeah, I'm sort of very happily a part of these two wonderful institutions that draw from such an interesting and diverse group of talented kids. So it's
And
such
that's
a
kind of amazing from your place where you mentioned before we even started the interview that you've got like 60 students or something at NEC.
something like that. Yeah. I mean, I
And I
see a
mean,
lot of people. Yeah.
how cool it must be to be able to work with, I mean, from the voice faculty position, we only have our students, right? But you get to
Right.
see all the voice peoples from all the different studios.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's probably on one hand, you've got to figure out how to navigate that puzzle by, oh, right, you
Yeah.
study with this person and they believe in this, or you study with this, and how do we work, which I really want to get into, and how we navigate that, or how you navigate that as a coach.
100%. Yeah.
But that's really exciting to think about the variety of different maybe, I mean, techniques, or the variety of different students and artists that you get to work with must be thrilling.
Yeah. It's such a pleasure to walk into a room with a certain kind of knowledge base of the repertoire. I
Right.
mean, something that I was looking at this group of coaches that you have, and I was thinking like every single one of us on that list has obsessively worried over this repertoire for a very long time and
Well,
different
and that's what
repertoires,
makes
right?
every one of you so incredibly talented and great and amazing and wonderful to work with.
Um, and so to have really dug into the layers of the repertoire that one is living with on a dailiness, but then having to actually consider that in a totally different lens and a totally different experience as different students come in, it's incredibly challenging and interesting work, really.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Well, the premise of the show, if you I don't know if you've had a chance to watch some of the other episodes,
Yeah,
but I thought it would
yeah,
I thought it would be interesting to have a really casual conversation about a topic that no one really talks about. When we as singers, sit down for that first read through, you might have some friends in the cast or have heard of somebody and admire their singing, but or you might have someone you never met before and they blow you away, right? And there's usually a conversation when they break it, like, let's say we sing acts 1 and 2, and then we take a 10-minute break and we come back, or maybe after the whole thing, and you go up to somebody and just, wow, y- your voice is unbelievable, right? There's always that. There's always the I don't understand. It's unbelievable how you whatever, right? But it rarely goes any deeper than that. And I thought, how interesting would it be, now that we all kind of have some time to slow things down a bit, to kind of get under the hood a little bit and talk about, you know, how do you navigate the passaggio on an eval as you're ascending while you have this next thing that follows, right? Like, how did you do? Like, what do you
Right,
think about doing? What you are you actually are you adjusting the vowel? Are you you know or
right.
how is it that you have such an easy top? Like, what are the exercises that you do to net to sort of build that? Or how do you access the low like so effortlessly? You know, whatever it might be. And so it's been great to kind of have these conversations and see um, where there has been, you know, occasionally just like natural talent, and then others who have really, really, really had to rethink and rework and figure out for themselves, you know, how to make it work and be more efficient. And then I
Right.
thought, well, you know, what would be even be more interesting, I think, to me and maybe other singers, hopefully, is to talk with pianists, coaches, you know, who work with singers all the time. And so you guys are navigating this kind of ocean of like, oh, okay, this is what you're doing technically. Well, you're really missing out on, you know, I mean, what would you say on a daily basis? What are like the handful of things that you're listening for when you work with a student?
Mm, yeah. Um, you know, all we have is this notation, right? It's a completely notation based profession, where we have these scores and this figuration on the page and this language and these poems, these texts, these libretti, right? And I think that I'm looking for the place where what is announced by the notation matches something in the person's personality, metabolism, the way they kind of move through the world, what's going on physically for them. I think that one can immediately spot that moment when the notation has been embodied and almost physicalized.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm looking for that point of comfort and looseness in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you know, this almost constant balance of discipline and play that is so essential to this art form.
Yeah.
And so I think that in a very general way, like when somebody walks in, I'm trying to discern exactly where they are in terms of their comfort level with what's on the page, with the score, with the repertoire.
Yeah.
I also do probably 90% of my work in the song literature. So um, to come into the room and have um, a poet's poetic language and kind of the way a poem moves and the way a poem sounds and the tonal world of the poem, um, maybe the scenic life of a poem in the room is also something I want to sort of, I think, listen for that, like listen for how deeply the singer is connected to what's going on textually.
Yeah. You know what's so interesting is that from the singer's education, that stuff that you're talking about right now is so often left off the plate.
Mm,
Do you know what I mean? I mean, occasionally, you know, I mean, and I think another issue probably for anyone who works with singers is that we all come from such a variety of different backgrounds, depending on you know, oh, you did a vocal performance degree. Oh, but where? Oh, okay, it was a small private liberal arts university that's not really known. So what level of, you know, well, I don't know, diction, you know, I mean, don't get me wrong, Southwestern University, I'll be a pirate for life, right? But at the same time, I think that when we did diction, we did Italian, French, German, Latin, Spanish, and English in one semester, you know. And as you know, like that's a lot to try to sort of unpack in one semester. But it was like there was one semester for that, and then there was one semester for vocal pedagogy. You know, it's like how do we fit that into our plan? So whatever, you know, let's say you get into that, then you go to a master's program and you work your way through that. And depending on who it was that was teaching song lit or who it was that was teaching your you know language courses, you know, and what level those were at, and were they more focused towards what singers need, or was it just sort of like, you know, ciao, come stai? Bene. You know, it's like, what level do people
Right.
get to you with, right? And so, but that next level of like looking at the poetry in a way and understanding that our job as you know, the interpreter, is to really do just that and find, like what you're saying, like, how does this connect? How do I connect with this on a personal level? How do I tell this story from a first person's perspective and show that through my singing? And I think that's why we so heavily rely on brilliant musicians like you to be like, what are you doing? That doesn't work at all. Try it again, but think of that, you know.
Whatever you're thinking is not crossing over. Yeah.
Right, right. So I don't know.
Um,
What are some of the other things that are, well, let's say this. I didn't mention this when I started talking, but you know, in addition to the premise of the program being to have a casual conversation about vocal technique, more importantly, and perhaps interestingly, is to talk vulnerably about, yeah, you know, when I was coming up, I remember so clearly, like I was a bass in high school. I was like the guy with the reliable low C. We did all those sea
right.
shanties and stuff, and they were always like, "Okay, Weston, get ready." You know, I was always the one that could help out down there.
Right.
And then I remember when I got to college, my voice teacher was like, "You're not a bass, you're a baritone." I am? What does that mean? I was like, well, you know, don't freak out. You're going to be fine. But I'll never forget at the end of my sophomore year trying to make a recording of the Count's aria from Figaro.
Mm.
And I could do the whole thing, but I could not for the life of me sing the F sharp with any consistency. And I would try to record, crack, try to record, crack, you know, and it was so challenging for me to, I was all like, how do I learn to sing my top? Like, how can I, and even an
Mm.
F, like in the Old Maid and the Thief aria, When the Air Sings of Summer, I remember being in the practice room being like, okay, you know, just trying to make it work, you know. And it was very inconsistent for me. And it really wasn't until a few years later that I started to understand, oh, I was trying to use way too much muscle in order to try to navigate that. And I was, you know, I'm a very competitive person. I played sports growing up. So I was trying to take that mentality into, I'm going to sing the top, you know, and it just was not obviously working at all. And so I think it's really great for people to, you know, admit openly, lift the veil. It's like, yeah, I'm a human. And while right now, sure, you might hear me sing all the Verdi stuff or Puccini stuff and be like, wow, you must have always had. No, that took quite a bit of research and work and failing and figuring out. And so, um, you know, from your perspective, what would be the equivalent of that, like in your studies and as you're coming up as a pianist? I mean, I've talked to a couple of other pianists on this program, just sort of about the technical challenges that they faced. But what were some of the hills and valleys that you kind of went through finding this as a profession?
I think I would say first that I was incredibly lucky, first to have been raised in a very small university city in upstate New York that was not lacking in cultural opportunities. And so
That's amazing.
growing up with literature and music was kind of the most natural thing. And I was certainly, and I think still am, the sort of person that is passionately full tilt involved in what I'm interested in, and absolutely have no interest in the rest of it. So it's a sort of like tunnel. I was like a tunnel vision kid, very much like a tunnel vision kind of adult.
Well,
To
when did you start playing piano?
5,
Oh, okay, yeah,
and then when I was in high school, you know, strangely, through some strange luck, Diane Richardson, whom we both know,
of course.
lived in my hometown with her husband. And so I was introduced to her. And from the moment I heard the vocabulary that went on, the conversations that went on in these rooms between pianists and singers and voice teachers and singers to an extent as well,
Yeah.
um, I just had this intuitive sense of like, this is where I belong. I mean, I had not the slightest bit of vocabulary or knowledge. I mean, I didn't know probably a classical sound from whatever at that point,
I
but
mean, were you initially sort of on the track of being like you wanted to be a solo pianist? That
not particularly. I mean,
Hmm.
to be honest, I'm not even sure what track I was on. I mean, I've always been so literature obsessed and poetry obsessed. I think I probably would have ended up in some kind of I don't know, literature program as an undergrad. But when it sort of occurred to me that there was this world that merged these two worlds of text and music, and even more so that there was a place for a pianist in that world, I was completely and utterly hooked. I felt I had found my community of people, and
Wow.
I just really sort of stayed there. And I think, I mean, as I think sometimes happens, if you kind of declare your desire to the universe, people just started appearing.
Hmm.
Martin Katz appeared, Marco Garrett appeared, you appeared, singers appeared. You know, I mean, it just kind of, I was guided in a certain way. And I think to myself now, like, so many people don't have one transformative teacher.
Right.
Um,
Oh,
and
yeah.
there's a lot of teaching that unfortunately is not effective. And I was so lucky at a very early age to have a series of teachers who were not just teaching me the material, but really speaking to me and my needs in terms of the material. So
Mhm.
I think I was lucky in those terms. I think to your question of like what I struggled with, um, I have always struggled to play and make my way around fast music.
Oh, really?
I think I have a very slow approach to the keyboard physically. I
Hmm.
think I'm drawn to voices that speak slowly to the room. I think I'm drawn to a certain kind of I don't know, luxurious or kind of sensuous sound.
Hmm.
Um, and so, oh, you know, playing anything from Beethoven's First Piano Concerto, which I played as an undergrad, to um, La Danza by Rossini, you know, I don't know, you know, like, or Largo, you know, frankly, you
Sure.
know,
Yeah.
it's, I mean, anything, it's strange that, um, and I don't to this day know exactly what that is, but I think almost there's a metabolism in a person that has to kind of learn to switch gears a little bit, you know.
Hmm.
I know we say like fast music is supposed to feel slow and slow music is supposed to feel fast, but I've never
Sure.
quite understood exactly what that means. I mean, it sounds very smart and sounds completely logical, but
Right. Right.
I'm not
Right.
sure how fast music feels slow. I think fast music feels
Well,
fast.
the only way I can make fast music feel slow is by thinking, oh, I'm going to think four measures in one beat. And then there's another beat, as opposed to thinking of individual, moments
Yeah,
if it's like a long fioritura kind of passage or something. But yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I'm sure that there are wiser folks than I who could explain that. But
I think that was something I struggled with, and then you know, to this day, I can't seem to figure out how much work is too much work to take on, like how many projects are too much. I can't, and it's like such a sad reality to admit, because I have all of these students who are struggling with time management, and I should know more than they do about time management. And I probably do, but I don't know
how to say no.
how to say no. I really don't. And it's something that I struggled with enormously in graduate school when I was, you know, studying with this phenomenal teacher and wanting to just do everything,
Sure.
and wanting to learn the repertoire as quickly and completely as I could. And I think that dialectic in a way between like the fast learn and the sort of I just played a concert here on 48 hours notice, and I was like, what are you doing? What are you doing right now? What are you doing? Um,
But how did that go?
Well, see, sadly, it went well. This is the
Exactly.
problem, because you
Then
get
you can
away with
just
it.
say,
You
well,
get,
sure, I can do that.
it's a real problem. Yeah.
Right. Right.
But I think the dialectic between that and we were talking about this earlier. I mean, the incredible power of the immersive experience, like you and I meeting every week for how long to work on
Right.
digitally, or any number of a dozen or more situations like that that I've had where a singer and I have the luxury of just digging into the layers and then revisiting it and reprocessing it. I think that in a certain way is a struggle. Maybe for every coach, but for me, it was an enormous struggle of like, how much of the kind of thing do I want in my life? The kind of fast learning, everything is quick study, it's kind of fast paced
Right.
musical life versus like just cherry picking a couple of isolated projects. And what if I said no to everything else? What if I said no to
Right.
everything
What would that be like?
except
Yeah.
doing a premiere with you and doing Love Why You Men with somebody here and doing
Sure.
one other thing. That's it. That's all I'm gonna do.
That'd be a fulfilling year for sure. You mentioned some of your teachers. Can you talk a little bit about what some of the more influential teachers that you've had? And I mean, you don't have to name names, or you can name names, sure.
Yeah, 100%.
But
Yeah,
what is it that they brought, and
yeah.
how did, I mean, looking back on it, was there something that you felt like, ugh, I wish I could have done that now? Like, I mean, I think about that all the time. Like, God, I wish I could have that experience back, knowing what I know now. But throughout your sort of journey, who have been those influential people?
Yeah, I think first, one of the things that I truly grieve is that I can't be an apprentice again. Like I can't go to Tanglewood. My
Right.
students tell me they're going to Tanglewood. I think, damn you. You know what? Why don't we switch? You teach German vocal literature, Juilliard. I'll go to
Right.
Tanglewood. That's perfectly fair trade.
I
I'll get
get
to
you.
study with Margaret Garrett. But why can't this work? I really I can't. That's gone. That's a lost world. And so yeah, I mean, I met Martin Katz when I was at the Music Academy of the West at 19,
Oh, wow.
which to think that I had been in high school or something a year. I mean, it's
Right.
mind-boggling
Months
that,
before.
yeah, that's insane in a way that I encountered someone so transformative and life-changing at such an early stage. But I think that he had a way of transforming the notation and transforming this abstract word called style. He had a way of transforming that into something that felt like I was his only student. And like he had a way of just speaking directly to me about the notation and about what the music is supposed to sound and feel like.
I mean,
And
at 19 years old, I I can only imagine that something coming from him would seem I mean, am I mistaken by saying foreign? I mean, like, had you even thought along those lines at that point? Or, I mean,
funny, I mean, who knows what I was thinking? I don't know. um, I mean, I think that I was so hungry for it, and he represented my world,
mhm.
and he represented, I mean, an iconic example of the world I wanted to be a part of, and
Like,
and the vocabulary I wanted to be a part of.
do you remember
Um,
like something that he may have said, or an idea that he might have sort of ignited in you that's like, oh, I'd never even, yeah, of course, okay, and then that led on to something else.
this may be too general, but I think the idea that vocal music, line making is text making. And so like if you find the line of the language, if you find the inflection of the language, if you find the pulse of the language, that tells you where the voice is going to bloom. That tells you where the phrase is going to bloom. That tells
Wow.
you what it should feel like in your system. And I think that I mean, also just on a nuts and bolts level, I've never met another teacher who had such an effortless way of addressing the literal concrete aspects of things like 16th notes and glottal stops and consonant clusters with the more abstract sound. I mean, sound is kind of an abstract, color, right? These abstract things
Hmm.
that I talk about all the time. I've never met a teacher who had a more effortless way around those two worlds.
Hmm.
And so he was full of that kind of that kind of easy balance, you know, of what was on the page and what was more, you know, abstract and in the room. And you know, also I've said this actually to him, but um, to have somebody who is a legitimate stage luminary. I mean, like I was because I'm an obsessive nerdy type, like I remember parties at his house where I would just like be the quiet kid in the corner, like looking through his CDs, and which is like probably like terribly annoying, and you're not supposed to do that. But like, remember I pulled out this CD that I think was never released, of Renata Tebaldi's farewell recital tour at Carnegie Hall
That he
with Martin, that he played. And I'm just like, you know, dude is historical. Like you're a historical figure. Like you're legit famous. Like there's
right,
like you are a part of the vocal canon, and you're a part of this you're part of how you tell the story of classical
right,
music in the United States.
right.
And yet, like, I'm just like a kid waiting outside your studio for 4 o'clock lesson.
Or
You're just
hanging
like,
at his party. Yeah.
right. And like you're just like telling me what fingering to use for this. And like I mean, I find that just so moving and just literally amazing that somebody who who occupied that kind of stature as a performative artist on the platform and had that kind of power, you know, as a performative artist on the platform, was also just this person who had a vocabulary that just seemed utterly effortless.
Wow.
Um, and you know, I went from Martin kind of at the same time in my 20s. I was studying with Margot Garrett as well. Um, exactly the same thing, I would say. This exactly the same words. She has a totally different vocabulary than Martin, a totally different way about the music. I think they probably have different favorite things, maybe, probably in terms of the repertoire, but exactly the same thing of just like an effortless relationship between the stage and the studio,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
so rare. It really is.
No kidding. I hate that I have not yet met and worked with Martin Katz, but
Oh, wow.
yeah, I know. We are, for whatever reason, our paths have not yet crossed, but who knows? I'll
Wow.
throw it out into the universe that I would
Yeah.
love to work with that
Yeah.
man. And I think who
Yeah.
knows? It'll happen someday. But I will say that Margot Garrett was also someone who I encountered very early in my career.
Right.
Right out of undergrad, I got asked to join the National Opera Company, which was a group of 10 singers that was based in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Huh.
And it was initially called the Grassroots Opera Company. And a man by the name of Don Wilder ran this company for decades. And they would do touring shows.
Yeah.
And one of the, I don't know, um, mission statements was to perform opera in the language of the people. And so we would sing everything in English, and it was to really sort of educate. You know, we would take full productions, but I think one of the other things in the mission statement was to take opera where it's not. So I think that, like, if some city had an opera company, we couldn't come within like an hour and a half of that. You know, we purposely went to where you can't find opera to help produce it to communities
Right.
that would benefit, you know. So from the educational side, for our part, we were very grateful that they took this into consideration, you know, and they would bring in guest teachers to work specific repertoire, you know, in variety of different languages. Nico Castell, in fact, and his wife Carol would come down each year and do a scenes program where we would do everything in the original language. I actually got to do Act One of Bohème with him as Benoit. So he
Wow.
was Benoit, I was Marcello. It was, I mean, that is one of those, you know, again, it's like, wow, to get to work with him and get to sing with him and get to, but Margot Garrett came down and we did master classes with her. And like what you're saying, it's like that vocabulary, it's like I remember till this, I mean, this was like what, 1997, 98. And I remember to this day, like singing for her, the Ravel songs, even back then, and having her get things out of me as a singer that I was like, how did I do? What? Say that again. Like, what did you tell me to do? You know what I mean? It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, she's
Right.
such an incredible, and then to have the opportunity again to work with her when I was a student at Juilliard.
Right.
Yeah, there's some people in this world that are like, they just get it, and it's amazing, and
Yeah.
how fortunate,
Yeah.
for anyone who kind of gets in their
Right.
gravity pull.
Yeah. And it's wonderful to then, I mean, as I think as I moved from my 20s to 30s to 40s to sort of have signed on to that style of vocabulary, like to have signed on to that community of language where like this is how this art form is talked about. And
Mm-hmm.
I can really, I mean, I'm sure this comes across as so incredibly naive, but I really have the same fascination and curiosity and astonishment at the vocabulary that we use to talk to singers, I think, as I did when I was first figuring it out. I mean, I think it's interesting. I think what drew me to both those teachers was a certain kind of just galvanizing energy that they had,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
for lack of a better word, and that um, since that time, I mean, one meets other people like that too. I mean, I have right now a number of just um, a handful of really sensational voice teachers I know, and direct stage directors in my life.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same. I'm a student of theirs in a certain way, even though we're more like colleagues now.
Sure, sure. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that if you ever get to a point where you don't think that you can learn from someone, I think something's wrong.
Right,
You
right,
don't get it. You don't quite
right,
get it.
right,
But yeah, I think we should all make efforts to do that, to learn from one another and to learn from,
right,
certainly from our colleagues that we spend time with. I think that's
right,
great.
right.
Um, what are some of the things that you find yourself here, maybe trends, maybe that's not the right word, I don't know, things that singers are doing nowadays that annoy you, that you find yourself having to kind of correct and work through, and maybe that's not different now than it was 20 years ago, I don't know, but
Right.
is there any difference, like what's going on now in today's market?
I think that I mean, I'm very pleased to say that my students, who are almost all in their early 20s, or mid 20s maybe, um, have a certain kind of self-possession and a certain kind of comfort with themselves, and they're not afraid of difficult conversations. They're not afraid of stating their wants. They're not afraid of being outspoken. And I think no generation has had more information coming at them than these
Hmm.
kids. So they've
Hmm.
developed a certain kind of savvy in terms of, um, I think, what to take in a way.
Hmm.
Um, and I think conversely and strangely, my students who are in their early 20s think that it's 1965, and that
In what way? What do you mean?
there's like a very conventional career waiting for them, singing 5 opera rolls a year, that there are all of these tiers of houses, that you can make a middle class living, working as an opera singer in the
Very
United
easy
States.
to
They just
do, very easy.
shrug their shoulders. They apply to the same 7 young artist programs that you and I both know. They're
Hmm.
obsessed with their aria packages. Even saying that word makes me kind of cringe a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, and so, for as profoundly interior and progressive and interesting and savvy as they truly are as humans, there's this aspect to them that is just like not woken up yet in terms of what how how they can fit into the landscape, I think. And I
Right.
think it translates. I mean, that's kind of like a career commercial,
Well,
having to do with commerce, right?
yeah.
But I think it translates in a certain way into their artistry, where something becomes um, more conventional than it should be. Um, uh, the less risk taking, the better. The less personal, the better. The more like this other thing they've heard, the better.
Mm.
And so it takes the place of the or I should just say the sophisticated way that they think does not translate into what they're doing with the music that they love when they're on the platform, you
Hmm.
know. And so, of course, like I can help them with, I mean, that's my job, is to I sort of meet them at that place, right? But it surprises me in a certain way constantly that
Do you find that is something that's only started to kind of be present or trending in the last 5 years, 10 years, or has singers kind of always presented in that way, or is it?
great question. I mean, I think that I probably also had a very limited view of what the word career means
Mhm.
when I was in my early 20s as well. But I can only imagine that with all of the media content that's in front of my students all the time,
Yeah.
um, that their lives become really fractured in some way.
Hmm.
Their consciousness becomes somehow fractured.
So you say it's your job to fix that. How do you go about doing that? I mean, what is it that you try to open their eyes to?
I mean, deep readings of text, deep listening, in signing on to experiences with them that I know will be immersive for
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
I'm doing this year, I should say I just did this year, a number of curated concerts at NEC with a couple of handpicked students with each concert. And it was, that was a real pleasure to just sit with the material for a certain number of hours over the course of 3 months. And
Hmm.
so I think that um, a kind of deep interrogation of what's going on in terms of a scene, let's say,
Right. Right. Right.
um, somehow is non-distractive. Like they just kind of can go, okay, this is all I'm doing right now. I'm just excavating this place right now. And I think that that's a way.
Hmm.
um
For sure.
I think that I have to say that somehow my life has ended up so that I have had these full-time institutional jobs, for years and years and years. And I have to say, one of the things I think that really works about at least the two schools where I teach right now, um, one thing that really works and has worked for hundreds of years is this relationship between a singer, their private teacher, and their pianist. And I understand that 150 years ago, that was probably one person,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Sure.
Singer sort of had um, like a voice teacher, coach, guru,
Person.
teacher of some sort, person. But I have to say that at both schools, I'm really thrilled and privileged to have such a close working relationship with every single one of the voice faculty, and a really easy dialogue between the student and the voice faculty member, and a very I was going to say a very clear line of like where my job ends and the voice teacher begins, but I mean, I don't know that it's even relevant to say that. I mean, there is obviously a line,
Well,
right?
I certainly think that there have been issues. Certainly, I mean, I can think of a few stories I've heard, not about you, of course, but other coaches who definitely blur that line. So, I mean, that's a great topic. I mean, how far do you get into the technical
Mm.
aspects, and do you ever even talk about vocal technique per se, or do you find other ways to kind of get after it?
I never talk about. I mean, I'm the opposite of a technician. I also have never had the desire to sing a note in my life, and I only took a semester of voice lessons as a junior because someone said it might be good for you
Uh-huh.
to know the vocabulary. It was absolutely terrible advice, and I pity the poor person who had to hear me sing for a semester. So no, I mean, I'm very clear on where the dialogue around the physiological mechanism begins,
Right,
you
right, right.
know, and I absolutely have no interest in trying to have that. I mean, I have an interest in that dialogue. I don't have an interest in like those words coming out of my mouth.
Sure, yeah. But I mean,
But
you
having
obviously
said,
must be put in situations daily where
right,
you're dealing with
right,
someone who is struggling technically with something, and you're
right,
sitting there trying to help them out. So how do you address that? How do you get
right.
through
I mean, I think that to the extent that um, that language involves physiology, like you can't talk about, I mean, forget diction, pronunciation, enunciation. Like you can't talk about language without talking about the palate and the
that? Hmm.
articulators and the tongue and the tip of the tongue and
Right.
the fact that North American singers have terrible L sounds in every word,
Hmm.
right? You can't talk about the Ach laut in German without talking about the middle of the palate. You can't
Sure.
talk about you know, the difference between consonants in French, German, and Spanish, which we were talking about just this morning in class. You can't talk about that without talking about the mouth, right?
Right.
And so, of course, like that is a huge part of my vocabulary, right? Is saying like, you know, there is an open o inside of there's a closed o inside of there may or may not be a certain there may or may not be an inside of a certain other vowel, you know, all sorts of different um, conversations around how vowels relate to beautifully sung language, right?
Hmm.
And also uh, you know, to an extent, I mean, I'm so close to the singers I work with and so close with their teachers and so deeply entrenched in their processes that, I mean, I can say, you know, what did Carol say about that?
Right. Right.
You know, about how soft you should be on that floated high note, or what did Carol say about this breath? Or so I think that I I both do have a very clear line about where my job as a pianist and a musical assistant to a singer ends and where the technician's job begins, but
Hmm.
I'm not at all nervous or anxious about that line.
Good. No, nor
No,
should you be.
I have absolutely no anxiety surrounding that or hesitation really. But no, I mean, do I ever talk technique? Absolutely not. I wouldn't have the
Right.
slightest idea even what to say. No. But you know, having said that, I mean, it's interesting. We were a student of mine is right now involved in a really deep dive project about Pauline Viardot. And so together we've been looking at all of these songs. I mean, songs and arias from Gounod's Sappho to Spectre de la Rose of Berlioz, um, to Saint-Saëns, Dalila, which was dedicated to her. That you know, were in kind of in the ether surrounding her, surrounding
Hmm.
her. And you know, I did bring up in class, you know, like if only we could have heard that voice because we would know how much chest she mixed into things,
Right.
right?
Right.
We got that low extension in spectra that goes down. Like, wouldn't we love to know, like, on a pedagogical level, like, how much do you mix? I mean, that's an example where, like, I said mix.
Well, yeah, you're right.
I said chest voice. I said it. But I mean, of course, like I'm not the one to follow up on that conversation.
Right.
But
Right.
but I do think it's, you know, that of course, registration affects phrasing, registration affects language, registration affects tone.
Yep.
Um,
Well, it's interesting. I was talking. I was saying before that my partner in crime, Brian Email. We also I'll do a little plug. We also have a show that we do, which we're going to do tomorrow morning. We were inspired by like the Car Talk show that used to happen right
right,
before the Metropolitan Opera, Saturday broadcast, and so we call it the B&W Listening Lab, and we go and we kind of listen. We think about a different opera. Like the previous one that we did we did the Lucia recording with Scotto and Bastianini and Di Stefano, and we'll just talk about how these singers, when we were coming up, when we were listening to this recording, and we play excerpts from the recording and talk about all the stuff, right? And it's great. We have people call in, join our Zoom meeting, and talk about if they have questions or just big fans of the different singers that we're talking about that day. But he and I were talking about, getting back to what you were just saying, you know, when a tenor today approaches an aria like Il mio tesoro, that type of coloratura, or I mean anything, right? But like specifically the coloratura passages that are in that, Mozart was writing for a completely different type of singer. I mean, I think that technically, once people like Manuel Garcia came along and sort of redefined, wait a minute, we can actually learn to sing like this, which then creates this type of sound. And all of a sudden we start to use our bodies in a way of efficiency that, I don't know. It's a different kind of singing that I think we're doing now than were perhaps happening in the 1700s, right? So I wonder how, I don't know. I can't really remember why I started to bring that up, but we were talking about just the differences and the differences in style, differences in voices, differences in, all the
Right.
different technical things that can happen. And it's like, yeah, different repertoire. There's always struggles with singers, and we so heavily rely on others to help us figure those things out. And
Right.
I think, to your point, it's like you don't always have to talk vocal technique in order to help someone figure out how to sing
Right.
well,
Yeah.
or better.
And I think it's important to say, like, the coach and the voice teacher function as um, two essential parts of the singer's life, and those are very separate in a certain
Hmm.
separate and necessary, of course. And that's to say, I mean, many voice teachers function as coaches brilliantly, right? And I mean, a couple coaches I know have made the transition to voice teacher as well. I mean, I think that can happen, could
Sure,
happen,
sure, sure,
right?
sure.
But yeah, to your point, I wonder if it is possible with our students to somehow celebrate what is unique about them and celebrate all of the different ways there are to come to this art form, and celebrate what is unique about their gift and what is unique about where their particular voice blooms, etc., as opposed to, as I said, my students saying like, well, I want a career like that one, so
Right,
I'm steering that way.
right.
um
I know why I mentioned it. When you started talking about how wonderful it would be to have heard this person live,
right,
and
right,
right, so it's like I would have loved to have heard what did the original Octavios sound
right,
like? Like what who were these singers and how did they sing technically? How big was their instrument? How, you know what I mean? And so we don't have that type of historic. Well, it wasn't even invented, you know what I mean, to be able to record. And so, yeah, that's what made me think about that. But yeah, to
right.
your point, I think that there's an interesting discussion in smaller parts of the world. I don't know if you've had the pleasure of running into a woman, Dana Varga,
Sure.
who's in the
She lives
Boston
here.
area.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yep,
Sure.
yep. She talks a lot about, the pipeline, and it's sort of the way and the structure that things currently are kind of built. Like with what you're talking about, your students, like that's what I'm going to do. That kind of works for like 1% of people, right? Like, oh, I'm going to get into Juilliard, and then I'm going to go to Wolf Trap, and then I'm going to get signed with a major manager, and then I'm going to start working. It's tricky to navigate that, and a very, very, very small percentage of singers are able to kind of come out on the other side and be like, see, that was easy. And so I do think, and to, I think Joyce DiDonato was one of the first people who I heard say this, but she's like, there's not going to be a moment where you wake up and you go, I've made it. It's not about making it. It's about the journey that you're on. And I think that I know for me, when I started, I took that to heart, and I was like, that was smart. I don't know if she was meaning to be that smart about that, but that was a really great thing to say. And I think it helped a lot of different people, myself included, in thinking like, right, from the time that you are pursuing music until the time that you either make a decision to leave it altogether or die, you are on your journey, and whatever that
Right,
means, and whatever, you know. Now,
right,
of course, if we rely on our livelihood to support music to support our livelihood, right? Then we have to sort of not be able to just do any project we want to. It's like, well, is that going to pay the bills? And I think that's where the frustration sets in, because you're like, well, how many different things do I have to do? And then how do you get spread so
right,
one ends up can end up getting spread too thin.
right. Right.
But yeah, I wish, like you just said, that it would be like, how cool. I'm only going to do these projects, and I'm just going to do this, and like, you know. But yeah, also on the flip side of that, I'm not sure anybody can have the career that they want unless they tap into who am I?
Right.
Is the repertoire, and what is the poetry, and what is the
Yeah.
what do I have to what is my story? How do I tell that in a
Yeah.
way that is going to make people be like, "Ooh, we want to see him do all those roles," because that's or oh, when she, you know, sings
Right.
this stuff, it's just like.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of it is probably too you having to see qualities in individuals, and then suggest, hey, have you looked at, you know, or hey, you
Yeah.
might want to think about, you know.
Yeah. And hopefully leading them towards what is most distinctive and interesting about them. And then hopefully that opens some pathway where there's richness for them.
Well, yeah, and rarely do singers ever really know. We're so used to like, oh, okay, okay, sure, yep, I'll do that, you know. It's
Right.
which I think that whoever comes along and eventually treats singers as though that they can make up their own minds about things, that they
Right.
should have opinions about
Right.
stuff, I congratulate and applaud those people, because
Right.
so often we're just trying to, oh, okay, okay, I'll do that, yep, okay. And or the worst is, you're like, oh, I'm sorry, the constant apologies for any, you know, mistake. It's like,
Right.
it's okay to make mistakes.
Well, I think that one of the challenges that I know the two institutions face where I teach is this the students are completely and utterly overwhelmed, and I'm amazed that they can even have the time to learn a recital, let alone learn 4 arias to audition,
Right, right.
with for a young artist program. I mean, they somehow, as much as the administrations at these schools, the administration has never been better. It's never been full of smarter people who want the best for the students.
Yeah, that's a great thing.
It is. I mean, it's so blessed. I still think when you look at the actual credit hours and the requirements and the classes, I mean, it gives me an anxiety attack, and I'm well past the degrees, right? I mean,
Well, the little experience that I've had, you know, in full-time academia, I'm just it's like you look at the degree plan, and like you're saying, these credit hour classes, and so often, I mean, well, if we that really should be 3 or 4 even, but we can't do that because that's going to send them over the limit of this. So we have to, the coursework or the course load is going to be the same, but we have to reduce the credit hours, and then it's like, oof, it's a lot for sure.
I worked with an undergrad at Juilliard a few years ago who was in the process of getting a Broadway agent while she was an undergrad at Juilliard. She's a huge vocal superstar at Juilliard as an undergrad.
Sure.
We were doing a project together. She came to her coaching. She said, "Oh, I'm sorry. This is going to be terrible today." And I was up all night writing a fugue. And I just thought, I mean, great, great. But
Glad that you're
this
doing
is part of the problem somehow. Not that she shouldn't be writing a fugue, and um, not that the theory and musicianship training is not essential, because it is essential,
that. Right.
right?
Of
But there's
course.
just something that misfires here, and I don't know what it is, but there's something that misfires in terms of the what we're presenting to these students in these programs, and then expecting of them, really.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's, yeah, I don't, I
Sometimes,
can only control like what happens in the hours that I see them and the
of
hours
course.
we're focused on it. But it is a real problem in terms of just sheer overload. I say to my students, like, try to figure out where the line is between you feeling stimulated and feeling overwhelmed, and
Yeah.
like find that space.
That's tricky.
It's
That's a
very
tricky
tricky. It's
space
very
to
tricky.
find.
Yeah.
But that's ideal for sure,
Yeah.
because what's better than to have that kind of feeling of inspiration and yet not feel like you're
Right.
packing on too much. It's
Yeah.
that's interesting. Well, what I mean, looking forward for students to kind of, I don't know, singers in general, whether you're a student or a professional, what are some of the things that you feel like we can really be working on and focusing our energies towards that will, from your perspective, always going to be helpful?
I mean, I think that some of my heroes are my friends and colleagues who have started their own um, companies, projects, platforms um, in their own communities, um, very much like before COVID, the restaurant industry was going in the direction of these small curated places with
Hmm.
20 tables, um, with very carefully curated menus where you just wanted to be a part of that. You wanted to be a
Right,
part of what
right.
was going on there. I mean, I love what so many of my colleagues are doing in their communities to bring these kinds of opportunities. And I think if it's presented well and it's presented in a compelling way and the programming is um, inclusive and exciting, um, then that's a real way forward. Because I think it's much more difficult, to quote one of my colleagues, like it's much more difficult to move these large ocean liner companies, right? It's much more difficult to steer them
Yeah.
than the world of these smaller companies. Granted, um, there has to be some quality control, and singers have to be paid well, and
Well,
there's a
sure,
whole
but I
lot of
mean,
other complications. But
case in point, I mean, Long Beach Opera, for example, who Jenny Rivera, who, a wonderful
right,
singer who transitioned to administration, had just recently hired James Dara as the new artistic director of that company, who
beautiful.
I had the opportunity to work with him on a production of Cherubini's Medea. And I mean, brilliant doesn't even begin to explain what that guy
Yeah,
works with. But I mean, um, that's a company that is always so interesting. I think they originally did that. I mean, they're just doing new works. They're doing creative
right,
programming. They're doing,
right.
and I don't know, three productions. I don't know. I mean, again, they're not that huge ocean liner that you're talking about, but my gosh, what a beautifully creative, partnership and sort of way forward, like you're saying.
Yeah.
I think that's really, really interesting.
I think we have so many creative, visionary colleagues just among us, really.
Yeah.
And we have this collective need for narrative. We need acoustic music. We need to be in acoustical spaces. We need stories. We need to be in spaces that nourish us with stories. And I don't think we'll ever stop wanting that. I mean, my wife and I talk about, like, in an almost mythologized way, about how we used to sit in a small Broadway theater watching a Kenneth Lonergan play, like where you couldn't move because you would touch the hair of the person in front
Right,
of you. It's like, were we ever that close to a bunch of strangers? It's like, yes, and we will be in that theater again.
right, right.
Because this is what we miss. We miss that.
I know, I know. I think from the singer's perspective, and I don't know if it's just it seems so. It's like this. I remember thinking of it like this when I was a young singer on the outside. How do you get invited in? How do you get you know, the green jacket? I'm not that huge of a golf fan, but I know the Masters is happening. Anyway, how do you get the invitation? And so, to your point, like with this creative program, and I mean, would I mean, to say that, yes, you need to know who you are, and I think that's maybe been the theme from today, is like really know who you are and what you have to say, and then be able to find rep or talk to people like you who can help you find rep that really brings that definition to life musically.
Yeah,
Would you agree with that?
absolutely. And also, I think, to my students who are in their early 20s, like, this is your community. Like, these are the people you're going to move forward with in the stream,
Right.
and to take care of each other, and put human decency at the top of your list
Isn't that the
and
truth?
treat each other well. And, I mean, I think when I did young artist programs, although they were transformative spaces where I would never have come in contact with the teachers I came in contact with, I cannot say they were safe spaces really, at all.
The
And
young artist programs that you
that I
did
did
as like opera
as
companies, or you mean
like young artist opera programs, or I mean
yeah,
various
yeah.
the sort of young artist circuit that people do. And so I think that this my students who are I should say all of us who are so outspoken now about issues of human decency and you know leading a high conversation from a high place and having higher standards. I think that will change the culture, and
Hmm.
it has begun to, I hope.
I hope so too. Yeah, because I think we rely on that, and it certainly feeds me in a way that is exciting, because I think we've had enough of the whole staying away from acoustic spaces, and not being able to go into those small Broadway theaters, and not having that intimacy of watching the spit fly from the singer's mouth. It's like,
I say to my students all the time, like, I want to hear a pianissimo sound acoustically again. I want to hear a floated high note again.
right,
I want to be able to experience the gradations of sound below pianissimo again.
right,
Um,
right.
because I don't know about you, that's really what I've missed in my Zoom lessons and coachings and classes, is being able to really assess the lower end of the dynamic range.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I've taught in some digital media form or another for the last 12 years, 15. I mean, anytime I mean, ever since certainly Skype has been around, I mean, you get hit up on places. Oh, hey, can I have a lesson? Yeah, sure. And then you leave, and they're like, well, hey, could we set up something online? Hey, sure. And so if you're used to hearing what that sound is, and you can absolutely grow. I mean, I've watched my amazing studio at UMKC through this. I mean, as we all are doing, but through this crazy medium, I've watched everyone grow and develop. And I had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to go live in person, and we, we're in these gigantic rooms, and
Right.
we're 30 feet away. But I wasn't surprised by anyone's voice, because I had been listening to
Uh-huh.
them with, a good
Right.
audio interface and speakers and everything and
Right.
good stuff. But at the same time, it was to be able to hear that initial moment of the onset of sound where you're like, oh yeah, I remember what that sound like. That's really great to hear
Right.
that in person.
Right.
It was
Right.
it was cool. And then, like, I'm fully vaccinated.
Right.
Brian is fully vaccinated, and I had a professional student of mine who is also fully vaccinated. She came over today for a voice lesson, and he and
Wow.
I kind of worked with her, and I was just like, I cannot tell you how amazing this, hour and a half, two,
Right.
whatever, we probably did 2 hours today with her. It was
Right.
just incredible to have that experience again of like, it zooms in on,
Right.
okay, let's fix this, okay, let's adjust this. How does that hit you?
I started in 2 days a week in person at NEC in I think February, and I was amazed at how easily and quickly we both assimilated back into the experience. Like there was
Right.
no period of adjustment again, or it was sort of like, this is what we do.
Yeah.
But the same feeling of just relief in a
Right.
sense of hearing
Right.
that on set. Yeah, that's
And of
interesting.
course, me, on Zoom, if I try to play a scale along with it, you can't
Yeah.
create synchronously unless you're on sound jack or whatever. But
Right.
um, to be able to just sort of, I can't imagine from your perspective, like just be like, oh yeah, it's the link between, being able to literally make music together at the same time. It's like,
Right.
that's probably what,
Yeah.
certainly from the singer's perspective, that's
Yeah.
that's what I have missed a great deal.
Yeah. And
Not
I
so
mean,
much
almost all
the
of
pre-recorded track.
almost all of a collaborative pianist's work is textural. And so you're wanting to sort of capture something of that, the
Sure.
singer's sound in your sound. And I mean, it's just, that's been something that I've craved so much. I think we all have.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, texture, not with
Texture.
text, but yeah,
Right, texture, the actual sonically just
right.
being in that world. You know,
Totally. Totally. Well, this I mean, here we are at an hour 10. That flew by like it was like 10 minutes, man. It's so great talking with you. All I
great.
want to do now is come over and have a coaching with you and sing through like every song I've ever learned.
We
And
will.
I
We
think
will.
that would be a great plan to look
Yeah,
forward to.
great.
I hope you have a great rest of your Friday
You
and
too. Thank
your
you so much
weekend.
for this. And I look
Yeah.
forward to the other coaches coming up. I can't wait.
Oh, I do too. Yeah, I can't wait. I
Great.
can't wait to talk to
Yeah.
all of them. We've got
Yeah.
Carrie Ann Matheson and Mia M, Myra Huang. Yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun.
Great.
All
Thank
right,
you so
man.
much, my
Well,
friend. Take
thank
care.
you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.